It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Aaron Zaleski, Paris correspondent with The Daily Beast. How are you?
I'm well, thanks.
I want to welcome back to the show as well, Celestine Bolton, former New York Times columnist and correspondent. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Alexis Poulain, co-founder of the online news magazine The Modern World, Le Monde Moderne.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
And on this busy Friday, Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review, is with us. World Politics Review, it's not just a website anymore.
Oh, no, we've had newsletters for some time, and we just redesigned them. So they're looking nice and sharp. And for anyone who's not a subscriber, if they visit the website, they'll be prompted to sign up, and they'll be able to keep up to date on what we're covering.
All right. Thanks for that, Judah. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag World This Week. France's first militant attack of 2018. A 26-year-old with a rap sheet in petty crime is dead after shooting at riot police out doing their morning jog in the southwestern city of Carcassonne and then holding shoppers hostage in a supermarket in the nearby town of Trèbes. 3 killed, several injured, including a policeman. A gendarme who had convinced the attacker to swap him for another of the hostages. And Alexis Poulain, at this point in time, there's this feeling of, on the one hand, some say wariness, because here we are again with another one of these kinds of attacks. And on the other hand, saying, well, it shows that they're on the back foot if it's smaller operations like this one.
Yeah, well, it's always been like this kind of rogue jihadist fear. And since the campaign for the election and Macron being elected, Collomb, the interior minister, they've been clear that there will be further attacks with that kind of scale, either be it with cars, be it like one guy with a gun, or even with knives. I mean, it's something that there's no contingency plan, and you can't really help. I mean, it will happen again. It has happened in the past, and you can't really predict. Even if the guy is followed by the services and is known, when they decide to come into effect and action, it's very difficult to respond. And yet it's new because is going into this shopping center and getting the shoppers there, which is quite big. And clearly it's a suicide operation as well. He has no intention of going out of this alive.
When you get that news alert that says an attack, what's your reaction, Celestine?
Oh my God, not another one. I mean, this is, particularly when you see France somehow, I was thinking of it. I mean, other people have had attacks, certainly London and other parts of Europe, but somehow France sort of gets more than its fair share. So that's one thing. I mean, I think the other is, where are we with identifying this as an ISIS coordinated attack? I mean, certainly in this case, it's way too early to say, but I mean, I think in other ones also, it's sometimes questionable. So you're talking about kind of wannabe ISIS people, I mean, or just inspired by their propaganda. So I think it's, that's the question that hangs over all these, particularly the smaller cases.
Aaron Zaleski?
I mean, he does fit a certain profile to date. Again, we don't know, was he taking orders from someone or was he inspired by ISIS? But it seems at this point to be a lone wolf, a petty criminal. He was targeting law enforcement officials. That has happened numerous times already, especially here in Paris. What was most surprising to me when I got that alert was Trèbes. It's a town of 5,500 people. And it's just not the place that you would ever imagine a terrorist attack unfolding. You hear the refrain, it can happen anywhere at any time, but then when it does, it's still a bit jarring.
And of course, it happened in Carcassonne, near and Carcassonne, with a lot of parallels being drawn to Toulouse, where almost to the day 6 years ago there was an attack, and big immigrant community, people living in working class neighborhoods where there's a lot of unemployment. And
with a military base, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly.
And I would say about this attack that yes, it's the kind of residual terrorism that France and other countries in Europe and probably the U.S. are going to face for the foreseeable future. We don't know how long that will be. In terms of the kinds of attacks that people are really dreading, especially when you look at what's going on in Syria and Iraq, the Islamic State is, in terms of being a territorial, holding territory and being not so much an insurgency, but a power holding territory. That's almost finished at this point. They're in retreat. They've basically scrambled to save themselves from the battlefield. And what most of the security services in Europe are worried about is the people who might return. And so those are the people that are really frightening to security services, because they're battle hardened, they're committed, they know their country of origin very well. So this kind of attack that we see today, as horrible as it is in terms of the human element, is not the worst kind of attack that people like Colomb and Macron are worrying about. I think the second thing that I'm curious to see is what impact this sort of thing has on Macron politically, because when he was running for president, this was really his weak card. He had very little experience in foreign policy. He wasn't seen very credibly as a protector of France. So I'm curious to see what political cost he might pay and what he might try to do to try to counteract that. He might overreact, in other words, to make a point, and that would be a risk, I think, in terms of going too far to limiting certain civil liberties, for instance.
All right, it's all very new. It'll be playing out over the next few hours and days. French broadsheet of record Le Monde calls it an affaire d'État, an affair of state. We're talking about the pressing of charges against former President Nicolas Sarkozy. It's indeed much more than just another campaign financing scandal. Sarkozy accused of accepting millions from Muammar Gaddafi to fund his winning run for president back in 2007. Now, this story includes shady middlemen, cash envelopes, a safe deposit room officially rented during the campaign to store the candidates' speeches. Sarkozy's strategy on national television, well, to come out swinging.
La bande Gaddafi.
The Gaddafis are a gang of assassins. The father, the son, the nephew, the cousin, the spokesperson, the mistress, the brother-in-law. They have slandered and vilified me. When did it start? The French people must know. On March 10th, 2011, I received Gaddafi's opposition at the Élysée. On March 11th, Mr. Gaddafi started talking about financing my campaign, but never before that. For 4 years, he never said a word about it, never.
What did you think of Nicolas Sarkozy's defense?
Well, it's not a defense. I mean, it's fake news. It's trying to protect himself in front of cameras, but the real defense will be in front of the judges and with his lawyers. It's getting very tough for him now. It's been 11 years. It took time because it's a very complex affair. You already have people close to him that have been under the scrutiny of the justice.
And there's obviously evidence that we in the public don't know about.
Yes, clearly. That's why the judges had him in custody for 2 days, because they have new evidences coming from Bourgie, coming from people that have talked or given new evidences. One being Takieddine. He accused him of being
this Franco-Lebanese businessman who's a
arm dealer.
Artful dealer.
Yeah, well,
arms dealer. Okay.
And this guy was a good friend of the, let's say, right clan during the Balladur campaign back in the Chirac years. And Sarkozy was one of the man of Balladur's, and he was friend with Hortefeux and all the people that were around at the government.
Sarkozy, in that interview we saw, he says he barely knew Takieddine.
Yeah, well, again, fake news. It works now. It's alternative facts. So you can keep on this, and as long as there's no cameras and no picture and so on. But Jean-François Copé was paid the price for these pictures.
I mean, it's always been his strategy, Sarkozy, is to deny. And this isn't the first time that he's been in legal trouble. So,
in light of what's going on with the Russia meddling right now in the United States, here we have a very serious accusation, which is a foreign government bankrolling a political campaign.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. When you gave the brief run up to describing everything that was going on in terms of suitcases full of cash and clandestine meetings, my first reaction was, French politics. It's been like that.
Old French politics,
and it's been like that for a really long time. If I'm not mistaken, the Balladur campaign had accusations of taking kickbacks from an arms deal as well with Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a submarine, and then some French military were killed.
Exactly.
Right.
So there's always been a lot of shady financing going on in French politics, as well as other countries. I don't think it stands alone. I think for me, the real question that I have, and Alexi and I were talking about this before the show, I still haven't seen conclusive proof, and I don't know that we ever will, that it comes from Gaddafi. I'm sure that there was a lot of cash floating around the 2007 Sarkozy campaign. Where it came from is probably problematic. Did it come from Gaddafi? I'm withholding judgment for now.
Well, because we haven't seen the evidence, but if it does turn out to be true, does that change your view of Nicolas Sarkozy and David Cameron making that push to bomb Libya in 2011? He's shooting at the man he owes money to.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Cameron was involved in this, but I think that the Sarkozy and sort of flip-flop, I mean, it was a flip-flop whatever way you make it, because in 2007, he greeted Gaddafi here for a first in 34 years visit.
It was a state visit where Gaddafi set up his tent.
Unseen.
And it was
never before.
I mean, it was sort of, amazing to watch.
This guy was a state terrorist, for the Lockerbie bombing and all that, and he was there
they
like
rolled out literally
the British
red
Queen.
carpet. And he was going on the Seine, remember, with a boat, sort of talking up women's rights. That was an interesting talk about fake news. But anyway, the point being, alone among Western leaders, Sarkozy gave him this huge hello. And then, so what is it, 4 years later, he is leading the campaign to oust him. And so sort of regardless of the money, although the money makes it much more serious, obviously.
But why did he turn on him? That's the question.
Well, I mean, I think, the story goes that Bernard-Henri Lévy brought this opposition to the
French intellectual brought all this opposition.
Right. And persuaded him that they were decent folks, and on the back of the Arab Spring that had gone through.
A different narrative that's been spelled out in one book is that Sarkozy cozied up to Qatar, and Gaddafi didn't like it, and they had a falling out.
Well, Qatar was not anti-Gaddafi. I mean, they had business ties. But maybe there was some business that was not really liked by Sarkozy. But I think the storytelling is going on. Like, why was it so fast in striking Libya? I mean, okay, Bernard-Henri Lévy coming with opposition.
Well, the argument would be that here you had Gaddafi promising a bloodbath and marching on Benghazi. And you had to act fast.
Yeah, right. And okay.
To me, the real problem is that Gaddafi. There were plenty of reasons to go after Gaddafi, and there are plenty of people who could have given suitcases of cash.
Not inviting him at the Elysee.
But and there are plenty of people who could have given suitcases of cash to Sarkozy. So there's a lot of variables on both sides. Yeah. I mean, I'm struck by how much how much in terms of trying to make sense of the story. It's speculation. What were the motives? What were going on with Sarkozy in terms of accepting that kind of funding? There were clear motives in terms of making a deal. Sarkozy brokered a deal to free 8 Bulgarian nurses that Gaddafi was essentially holding hostage. And that set up the visit, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, Sarkozy was trying to sell nuclear reactors as well to Gaddafi. So
and more.
Obviously, in terms of French affairs of state, there's always a commercial aspect involved. Because of some of the state-owned enterprises, companies, and things like that. So there were a lot of motives but it's all speculation at this point.
All speculation at this point, and it's not just foreign states that meddle in elections. Sometimes it's private companies. Peru's president, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, just the latest in Latin America to go down after benefiting from the largesse of Brazilian construction firm Odebrecht. Odebrecht tied to bribes in 12 countries. In Kuczynski's case, there's also videos of vote buying and the pardon of predecessor Alberto Fujimori. Turns out that 3 of Kuczynski's predecessors, in fact, are tainted by corruption. Hence the calls in the streets of Lima on Thursday to get rid of more than just the president and clean out the entire Congress.
We protest because all Peruvians are demanding new elections and a new constitution so that all the corrupt people leave.
And the new president, the vice president, calling for graft to be investigated and for political quarrels to end, Judah Grunstein.
Right, which is the holy grail in Peru. Basically, the contradiction in Peru is that it's a country that has performed very well economically in terms of opening their mining sector, being relatively free trade oriented, and yet the politics are a mess. There's a huge amount of corruption, and as well as a huge amount of inequality. In other words, the riches of the country haven't been well distributed or fairly distributed. And the tragic irony of Kaczynski is that he was elected basically on a campaign platform to address both of those issues. I think
that didn't go so well.
No. It didn't go so well. At the same time, from what I understand, I believe his father was a humanitarian doctor who had a mission in the rainforest. I think he had an authentic commitment to trying to address inequality. And at the same time, he was tainted. So it brought him down. It began to bring him down in December. The other element to remember in this story is that he was not a particularly charismatic candidate. He was just the last barrier keeping Keiko Fujimori from winning the election. She's the daughter, Alberto, the former dictator. He promised that people were worried that she would actually pardon her father to let him out of prison. He promised never to do that. In December, when the first impeachment vote came up in Congress, he made essentially a deal with her brother to split some votes off from the opposition to free him, after having promised never to do it. So between the corruption charges that became more and more clear and the fact that he had gone back on his word, his political fate was sealed. Hopefully, the issues of corruption and inequality will be addressed because they still are the two open wounds in Peru in terms of what they need to solve.
All right, more on this as we see the new administration unfold. Stay with us. There's more to come in the world this week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Paris correspondent Aaron Zaleski is in our company. Thank you for being back with us. Thanks as well to Celestine Bolton, former New York Times correspondent and columnist. Alexis Poulain, co-founder of the news website The Modern World, Le Monde Moderne, and Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. We all know that when Hillary Clinton's campaign was conducting polling, Donald Trump's was doing data mining. Now, a Channel 4 documentary shows how the UK-based political operatives at Cambridge Analytica offered, well, a two-phased service to clients. First, you dig up the dirt, then you make it go viral. Here they are speaking to a reporter posing as a Sri Lankan political candidate.
We'll have a wealthy developer come in, somebody posing as a wealthy developer.
I'm a master of disguise.
Yes. They will offer a large amount of money to the candidate to finance his campaign in exchange for land, for instance. We'll have the whole thing recorded on cameras. We'll blank out the face of our guy and we're going to post it on the internet.
So it'll on the Facebook or YouTube or something like this, it can be done.
We'll send some girls around to the candidate's house. That was just an idea.
Yes.
We'll bring some Ukrainians in on holiday with us. You know?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes. They are very beautiful Ukrainian girls.
They are very beautiful.
Yes.
I find that works very well.
Celestine Bolton, your thoughts about
I was just struck by when he said, I find that works very well, suggesting that this is actually something, that he has done. I hadn't noticed that before. So
this is a company, by the way, before helping Donald Trump in his election campaign, helped with the Leave campaign in Brexit. Yes.
And also, paradoxically, with John Bolton, who's the new nominee to be the security advisor at the White House. So, they're pretty much everywhere. They were offering the Trump campaign this, what do they call it, psychographic data, which is a new word for me. And I think it's pretty sort of sinister the way they play on people. I mean, in many cases, it's people's weaknesses, whether, their neuroses, they play to fear, they play to... I don't know how it worked in the Trump campaign, to be honest. That's the one element that I haven't read that much about.
The thing that strikes me about the clip that you showed is that that's pretty old-fashioned political dirty tricks. There's the irony is that he's talking about trapping someone on camera while he's being trapped on camera. In another clip that I saw from that same investigation, either he or the other guy says, it's not facts that win elections, it's emotions. And I think that really gets to the heart of what we've seen over the last few years, particularly with regard to Brexit. We saw it first there, where the people who were campaigning to stay in the EU were talking facts and figures and numbers, and the people who were saying leave were talking emotions. But
maybe that's not what's new. What's new is that these media, Facebook, YouTube, that they mentioned in the clip.
That's what I was going to say.
They can drive
someone
those
taking
emotions.
a bribe. I remember in the 80s there was Abscam, where the FBI stung U.S. congressmen. It's the use of data that's been collected by social media that's the new angle to this story.
Yeah, it's a different scale. I mean, Alexander Nix on the picture here is also the guy from SCL Group, which is a consulting group on defense, one of the biggest for the British defense industry. And they're consulting for NATO as well about CEOP and fighting the Russian propaganda, especially in the Baltics. So, and they had millions for this. So it's really, we're talking here about people who are at war most of the time, psychological war, and have been used by political leaders to get elected using the old, propaganda and the Russian propaganda. I mean, you bring the Ukrainian girls, you put the camera, been there, done that. We all seen that. And what's terrible now is that you get Mark Zuckerberg in front of camera saying, oh, I think we've done bad. I mean, we should have maybe been more careful about protecting our users' data, which is not the case. I mean, the old business, the old money coming from Facebook is using this data. And it's inside the way the company is built is completely wrong. And it's not like, they had this for years. Every time it says, oh, it's been bad, we're going to change it. Let's move on to the next crisis.
Let's talk about that. Being the boss of Facebook means never having to say you're sorry, or so it seemed on Wednesday when Mark Zuckerberg posted an apology for that security breach, or as some called it, a non-apology apology, promising to do better, warning it will take time, and never including the actual word sorry. In a CNN interview the next day, he rectified, uttering the S word, and suggesting he'd happily testify before Congress. But there is this sense, Aaron Zaleski, that Facebook essentially arguing that it should self-regulate.
Yes, it's pretty much like that interview was a bit awkward, wasn't it? And he just seemed so uncomfortable. That's the thing. They're talking, Facebook should self-regulate, etc. But the larger issue is that I think a lot of people feel betrayed by Facebook.
Right.
The problem is that basically Facebook put growth and profit over the security of its users.
This is the thing. It's not a privacy breach. This is the use of their data, and just really underlining what Alexei said. This is the business model. Right. Their servers weren't hacked. This wasn't someone stealing information from them. It was a researcher who was given permission and to harvest this data, and then Facebook doesn't oversee any use of that information once it's outside of their. And so this is the core function.
So who's going to regulate it? Is it the Federal Communications Commission? Is it here in Europe? Who's going to do it?
Well, I think everybody, this isn't just the first time that he's gotten in trouble in the last year. I mean, there's just been a series of issues on taxes, on, I can't.
It's nonstop.
It's nonstop, and I think that is, they're on the back foot now, finally. I mean, not that this is what one welcomes, but just that how can there be something so big that dominates so many people's lives that's not in any way regulated from the outside? Who does it? I don't know, but they can't do it themselves when it's, any more than...
So who's going to do it? Is it going to be the Americans? Is it going to be the Europeans?
Here's the thing. This is a new currency. We've never seen this kind of currency before. It's information. It's data. It's people's activities online. It's their associations online. It's their answers to a personality quiz that they thought was just going to tell them what former U.S. president they most resembled. But actually, it went into someone's data banks. The point is, it always takes time. It's true that Facebook is guilty of being lax, duplicitous, and also for their core business model. But it's also true that it always takes time, anytime there's a real radical shift in any sort of landscape like that, for the regulation and the law and people's public opinion to catch up to it. So the people in America will drive it. The people in Europe will drive it. Europe's already taken stricter approach because European public opinion on privacy is stronger. In America, this might be the tipping point that causes governments to take action.
I'm not sure, because there have been scandals before with the defense industry where people were selling to the government, the US government, at prices that were not. And they said, oh, we're bad, sorry, let's auto-regulate. And they had this conference of defense provider. And I think with the GAFAs, the Google, Facebook, and Amazon of this world, they can clearly say, okay, we're big, we are part of the US economy, we can regulate ourselves. I mean, we don't need the government to come and look. So it has to be a coordinated approach and not letting these guys doing what they want.
Because we heard EU leaders at the close of the summit a few hours ago in Brussels saying there is a need now for rules and regulations.
Yes, but it's Europe saying that. I haven't seen any
move
in the US.
And if Europe does it on its own, does it work?
It works for Europe, yes, because it can be a protectionist, but then you can have Trump working with this guy and saying, okay, we'll see what we can do to.
The nature of online data means that, for instance, if Europe has stricter regulations, because the data might reside in American servers or elsewhere, that Facebook and Google and Amazon might have to change their business practices to conform to European regulations if the market in Europe is
That's what they've done in China, for example.
I'm not suggesting that they should be self-regulating at all. I'm saying that if there's pressure for government to step in, it will come from public opinion, and that this kind of incident is what risks driving public opinion in that direction. Because keep in mind, Silicon Valley has become an enormous source of political financing in the U.S. So it's not just going to be Congress that, out of the goodness of their hearts, turns on Silicon Valley. There's got to be a driver, and that driver has to be public opinion.
All right, we're talking about that EU summit. It's concluded with the bloc looking torn between the superpowers. First, let's look east, where Brexit or no Brexit, Europe's got Theresa May's back over the nerve agent attack in Salisbury, England. It's left a former Russian spy and his daughter in critical condition. Emmanuel Macron calls it an attack on EU sovereignty and pledges a coordinated and proportionate response. So far, though, the response is restrained, like when the Dutch Prime Minister gets asked about it.
A decision's been taken. He's not withdrawn, but he's being recalled for consultations to Brussels.
He's talking about the EU ambassador who's not been withdrawn, but has just been brought back for consultations. Do you think Macron's just words, or will there be a coordinated response, Celestine Bolton?
I mean, we've already had the four, so the British, the French, and the Germans, and the United States coming out with something in words, yes, but strong together. I think the whole point here is about unity, and it's, if there's a little bit of a price to pay to get the unity.
So they're united
because I think
in condemning.
that the Russians are very eager to play the divisions, and they were lobbying yesterday with the Greeks and with the Finns, and that's not by accident that there's. It's
if there were an Italian government, they'd be lobbying the Italians.
Right. I mean, the point is, and I think seriously, it's that as to the evidence, how hard is it that we can point to the Russian government? I'm not. I mean, it came from there for sure, and it, from with some degree of, approval from somebody in Russia, yes. But, if we have to kind of just withdraw and not, they didn't withdraw, they just called him back or whatever. I mean, if there's a kind of a diplomatic wiggle room for those who are less hard and fast on this subject, then I say go for it for the sake of unity.
Go for it for the sake of unity. By the way, we were in Moscow this weekend, and I thought we'd bring this back for you, Celestine.
Thank you.
You being the Russophone, maybe you can read it for us. What does it say?
I might need my glasses. I chose the president of Russia.
Okay.
So
I chose a president of Russia.
Not
voters.
The
president of Russia.
There is no
voters
article.
Got this at the polling stations on Sunday.
So they knew exactly who he was going to.
We have a president who's been reelected. It's not much of a surprise. Does that change will that at all change the dynamic with Western Europe?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's, I think the thought of 6 more years of Putin, gives us pause, gives us pause. I mean, if he's already been feeling so cocky now, how is he going to feel when he's got another 6 years free and clear ahead of him?
So the EU feeling that crunch from the East and looking west, the EU got a little bit of a reprieve during this summit, with Donald Trump hitting the pause button on steel tariffs for the bloc. The U.S. president not holding back, though, when it comes to slapping an estimated $60 billion worth of sanctions on China over steel dumping, intellectual property theft, and, well, the trade deficit.
To get it taken care of. And frankly, it's going to make us a much stronger, much richer nation.
Alexis Poulain, you're laughing, but the EU leaders are not laughing because they say they've put this May deadline where maybe they will slap the tariffs on them anyway.
Well, they got a deal. I mean, there won't be the tariffs on the EU steel to the US.
But it seems like there's a sword of Damocles over Europe's head.
Well, always, it's called NATO, but it's that's the way it works. And with Russia and with Putin elected, it's going to be very difficult to work anyway with this Trump administration, because you never know what's going to be next to make America great again, and it might mean
one of the
Europe
things
small
I think
again.
that's key out of all this is that the people who won in all this back and forth are the lobbyists. So
yes,
to make the lobbyists
lobbyists. I mean, they love this, and bankers.
The thing that strikes me about the entire premise of this segment is that Europe, the purpose of Europe was so that it would be a big kid, a grown-up adult, not a kid at the kids' table. It wouldn't be torn between the East and West. Right. It would stand for what it stood for.
So which is it stronger? Is it stronger on the Russia part, or is it stronger when it comes to the trade? When it comes to
Russia, the divisions are there within among European countries, and within every European country of note. Whether it's France, Germany, Italy, Greece, there's a very strong pro-Russia lobby among big industry, especially, and within the government.
And on this issue of trade, and on this issue of tariffs,
with regard to tariffs, that's much closer to the EU's strong point because it's mainly a trade power. Yeah. Without the problem with Russia is that now there's a military element thrown in. And that's precisely where the European Union in particular isn't really on its strongest footing. With regard to trade with the U.S., they're much stronger. But again, the idea was that Europe was not going to be bullied around and pushed around, whether by America, by Russia, by China.
But when you have Trump in the White House,
first you have Europe to be functional. So far, it's not the case. I mean, the main thing is that the countries in Europe have been competitive. I mean, there's no one thing. I mean, we still have different legislation. And even if Macron wants to be hand in hand with Merkel saying we're strong now and we're going to lead Europe, it's not the case. You got the Visegrad in one corner, you got the Italian, the Spanish, I mean, the Brits are going. So it's easy to get in and say...
I think it also could have very well been another instance, one of many, of Trump just speaking before thinking through something. It was interesting that I'm going to slap these tariffs on everyone, and then a couple days later.
The other thing is strategically, the big fight is with China. And everyone agrees that China's trade practices have become more and more unfair, and that something needs to be done, something intelligent, but something needs to be done. Now, to do that, you need Europe and the United States united on that. Macron just went to China and said the same thing. Europe is coming to a stronger position with regard to China. If the United States, at the same moment of starting this battle with China, alienates Europe, it doesn't make sense for for either side. So it's the sequencing in terms of Trump's policies could have been a lot better. Yeah.
Remember John Bolton, by the way? George W. Bush's one-time neocon UN ambassador who had to be removed after a little more than a year in office when provocative remarks like there's no such thing as United Nations finally proved too much. Well, in this week's installment of Trump White House musical chairs, the Fox News pundit is the new national security advisor with some set ideas on what's in the job description.
But once the president makes a decision, the cabinet departments and other bureaucracies should implement the decision. And there, I think the National Security Advisor's role is to make sure that the president's decision is carried out.
Make sure that the president's decisions are carried out. Aaron Zaleski, I can't help noticing that the Daily Beast has not been too charitable to John Bolton with its coverage.
No, true enough, true enough. I mean, my immediate thought when saw the revenge of Bolton or the return of Bolton is it's almost as if Trump is acting on this megalomaniacal urge to reform the cabinet in his own image. And if someone doesn't fit,
and why
they're
not?
out.
He's president, right? He's allowed to put like-minded people.
Yeah, but it's Trump.
Somebody had a very good line that, he's taking all these people from television, from Fox News very specifically. So his economic advisor, now Bolton, and somebody, I can't claim, said he's like a little kid sitting in his crib who's demanding all the toys that he's just seen on television.
It's the Foxocracy.
It's the world is Fox, so it's like the Fox government.
So, I mean, I think it's... and
but
there's so many
very
ways...
alarmist headlines. Be afraid, it's dangerous.
The thing about Bolton, there are a couple things. First of all, in terms of the over-under on this, I'd put it under 3 months. I don't think he's going to last.
You don't think he's going to last?
I don't think he's going to last.
He agrees with Trump on Iran. He agrees with Trump.
Yeah, but for instance, Bolton, for all his flaws and faults, and they're legion, he's not a yes man. He says what he thinks. And the truth is that I think on Russia, for instance, in particular, he'll disagree quite sharply with Trump. With North Korea, Trump wants the glory of a deal and diplomacy, and so now they're not necessarily on the same page there. So I think that it might not be as long a relationship as we're expecting. The other thing that I think is very interesting is what he described as the NSA's job, which is not the job at all.
Because that sounded like the chief of staff.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, what we've been hearing since Trump became president is disregard what the president says, watch what the government does. And the idea is once he says what he says, then the government keeps going along with their business. So obviously that would be a problem if you wanted Trump's agenda carried out. The NSA's job is actually to marshal the policy process among all of the various cabinet agencies that are involved in a decision, and to make sure that as the recommendations come up the line, that they're agreed upon until it reaches the principals and the president's desk. When the president makes a decision, it gives him a huge amount of power over filtering out things that he doesn't want to reach the president's desk and putting things in. So he's not quite accurate in terms of what he's describing as the job. The power is elsewhere.
Alexis Poulain, final word on
Well, he's just talking in front of camera and is saying that to please Trump. But clearly, it's a powerful position, and he's for power, and he has clearly an idea on what to do with Middle East and the rest of the world. So all that was said was clearly to say, oh yeah, I'm here to please the president, and then we'll see. And
he's the one who's whispering.
It might be very close.
Right.
Yes, of
There's
course.
an
He's the one
audience of
telling
one
the
for
president
that.
what to do, of course. Just like was Bannon at one point.
We're going to have to leave it there. Alexis Poulain, Aaron Zaleski, Celestine Boland, Judah Grunstein, many thanks. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.